Do you know that sometimes the strongest weapon we have makes no sound at all? It's not arguments, not endless debates, but silence. Because in silence, the one who did wrong has nowhere to hide. They're left alone, face to face with their guilt gnawing at them day by day. And you within that stillness discover strength, freedom, and even healing. I want you to imagine this. Someone insults you in front of a crowd. If you fight back, people will only remember the conflict. But if you remain silent, the atmosphere suddenly shifts. All eyes turn toward them, and in the mirror of your silence, they see their own rudeness exposed. That is the power of Stoicism silence. As a mirror that reveals the truth, in a noisy world where everyone struggles to be heard, silence often becomes the loudest voice. Silence is not weakness, it's a message. I am in control. I don't need to prove myself. I let truth and time speak for me. That's not only personal strength, it's a legacy you leave behind for the world. 1. Silence as emotional training. An inner disciplined silence is not escape. It's the breathing exercise of a mature mind. As we grow through life's collisions, we realize not every voice deserves the rhythm of our heartbeat. I often tell my middle-aged students, silence is the training ground of willpower, a place where you learn to pause, observe, and only then choose how to respond. Have you ever felt that rush of anger right before saying something that could ruin weeks of peace, yet you managed to stop, take a deep breath, and let the wave pass? In that moment, you didn't lose. You won over yourself. In therapy, I often invite my patients to imagine a switch. On is reaction, off is choice. Every time you flip it to OFF, your brain carves a new path of calm. Your heartbeat slows, your voice softens, your eyes see more clearly. Silence filters out the noise, helps you separate what's worth holding on to and what's better to release. It saves energy, protects your dignity, and slowly shapes a resilient identity. I don't need to shout to exist. Try this practice. Before replying to a harsh email, count to 10. Before answering an insult, pause for 3 breaths. You'll be surprised how many battles burn out on their own right, in the palm of an open hand. And when you stand firm in the discipline of silence, something subtle yet powerful begins to happen. The wrongdoer is left alone in the stillness where the voice of guilt begins to echo. To guilt is the harshest sentence. Guilt doesn't need a judge's gavel. It pounds on the chest in the sleepless nights. When you don't respond, they lose the script to cling to. No argument to distract them, no shouting match to split the blame. Your calm not, your anger leaves them with no one to blame. Only the mirror of silence, showing them their own face. I want you to picture this. The music in a room suddenly stops. Every noise disappears, and what remains is the uneven heartbeat of a troubled conscience. For many of my patients, the torment doesn't strike instantly. It stalks them, it repeats, it erodes like water wearing down stone. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, when actions clash with values. The mind creates pressure, forcing a person either to correct themselves or invent excuses. But when you stay silent, you remove their excuses. You've disarmed the bomb. Instead of wrestling with you, they're forced to wrestle with themselves. 1. Husband once lied to his wife when she stopped interrogating and simply lived within her quiet boundaries. He began to hear the buzzing mosquito of guilt everywhere. At breakfast, while driving, even while laughing with his child. That is the harsh sentence of guilt. It doesn't imprison the body, it imprisons peace of mind. And the longer it lingers, the heavier it becomes. You don't need revenge. Time and silence will lead them to the only hot seat no one can escape. A conversation with themselves. 3. Silence as a mirror. Once guilt has risen in silence, it needs a mirror to take form. And you, through your silence, become that mirror. The fascinating part is, a mirror never lies. You don't need to criticize, expose, or argue. Simply by standing firm in calmness, their behavior becomes visible on its own. Have you noticed? In a crowded room, if someone suddenly throws a rude remark at you, most people's instinct is to snap back. But if you remain silent, completely still, the spotlight no longer shines on you, but on the one who spoke. Your silence becomes a mirror, exposing their roughness. You do nothing, yet they condemn themselves. I remember a male patient, 52 years old, telling me about a company meeting. A colleague publicly tried to humiliate him in front of the boss. Normally, he would have fought back, trying to defend his fairness. But that day, he chose silence. He sat still, listened, and said not a word. The whole room fell into discomfort, and within minutes, the colleague began to falter. Afterward, another co-worker whispered, "You didn't need to say anything." Everyone could see what was happening. He told me, "For the first time in my life, I realized silence has more power than 1,000 words." Silence not only lets others see the truth, forces the wrongdoer to see themselves. Without resistance to push against, they have no choice but to face the reflection of their own actions. That is the most brutal mirror, reflection. And here's the remarkable thing. This mirror cannot be shattered by excuses. You can block my words, you can argue with me, but you cannot argue with the image of yourself staring back. One woman once confided in me that her husband had been unfaithful. When she found out, she did not cry, scream, or explode. She quietly gathered her life, kept silent, and walked out of the relationship. She told me, "I didn't need to curse him. My silence became the mirror he had to face for the rest of his life." And indeed, years later, her ex-husband admitted that what haunted him the most wasn't the separation itself, but the image of her leaving without a single word. That silent mirror stayed with him far longer than any shouting ever could. Have you ever felt that moment? When someone does wrong, and instead of reacting, you simply look at them in silence. That moment often lingers far longer than any argument because it leaves an echo in the other person's mind. Modern psychology calls this the mirror effect. When people receive no reaction, they begin to reflect on themselves, asking, "What are they thinking about me? How much of the truth do they see? Are they silent because they already know everything?" And it is that very questioning that torments them. Silence, in this way, is not emptiness, is a pure mirror, reflecting straight down to the bone. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When you stay silent, you force others to face the true color of their thoughts and actions. And that, at times, weighs heavier than any verdict. I often advise friends in their 40s and beyond. Don't rush to use words to correct someone. Try silence. It is not indifference, it is giving them a mirror. If they dare to look, they will see themselves clearly. If they don't, they will live with unease. Either way, you have preserved your own peace. Picture this: the next time someone insults you, instead of answering back, you stay quiet, keeping a calm gaze. The entire situation shifts. They are waiting for your reaction to prove themselves right, but your silence leaves them swinging into empty air. They don't strike you, they only strike at their own shadow. And the silent mirror reflects it all. Point 4. Silence protects freedom and mental energy. Once you understand that silence exposes truth like a mirror, there's something even deeper. Silence doesn't just affect others, it protects you. It safeguards your freedom of mind and preserves your energy for the things that truly matter. Think about the last time you were dragged into an argument, maybe at work with a manipulative coworker, or at home when a family member kept criticizing you. How did you feel afterward? Exhausted, right? As if the whole day's energy had been drained, leaving you with nothing for the things that actually matter. That is the cost of reaction. Every time you plunge into a pointless debate, you allow someone else to take your energy. But when you choose silence, you keep that energy for yourself. You don't waste it chasing instant validation. You save it for your work, your health, your loved ones, and for yourself. I've seen many middle-aged patients who, after practicing silence, told me, "I feel like I have more time, a clearer mind, as if I've been released from a weight." One man in his 50s shared that he used to argue endlessly on social media. Every time he saw someone post something wrong, he felt the need to jump in to prove them wrong. After years of this, he realized he had no energy left for his family. His evenings, instead of being with his children, were spent battling strangers online. Eventually, he trained himself to choose silence. He told me, "I no longer feel the need to answer everything. I stay silent, and I feel like my mind is lighter by dozens of pounds." For him, silence became the way to reclaim the freedom that social media had stolen. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And indeed, silence is how you claim that power. You cannot control other people's words, but you can always control your own response. Every time you choose silence, you are practicing freedom. I choose not to let anyone own my emotions. That freedom is worth far more than any small victory in an argument. I once met a woman in her 40s who was constantly criticized by her mother-in-law. "You don't care for the family properly. You're selfish." Every time she fought back, she lost her peace, and the relationship grew more tense. Then she learned to stay silent. No more justifying, no more arguing. She simply cared for her family in the way she knew was right. Gradually, the mother-in-law also fell silent. And she told me, "I didn't just win the relationship, I regained peace for myself." You see, silence is not only a mirror that makes others reflect on themselves. It is also a protective wall, guarding your inner world from outside chaos. You no longer have to pay the high price of your precious energy for meaningless battles. Modern psychology confirms this. Every time we react with anger, the body releases cortisol and adrenaline, stress hormones that speed up the heart, raise blood pressure, and tighten muscles. When this repeats, it drains health over time. But when you remain silent, the brain has space to recalibrate. Your heartbeat slows, your body relaxes, your mind clears. Silence preserves not only mental energy, but also physical health. Have you noticed how some older people, even when faced with criticism, simply smile gently and say nothing? Looking at them, you sense lightness, as if they live within an untouchable circle. That is the freedom silence creates. A freedom that does not need to shout to prove itself, only needs one steady pause to say, "I belong to myself." Think back to the last time you chose silence instead of arguing. Perhaps at that moment, others thought you were weak, afraid to speak. But a few days later, who was truly exhausted? Who carried the restlessness? Certainly not you. Silence kept your mind clear, and that is a freedom no one can take away. I often tell my viewers, treat your mental energy like a bank account. Every time you waste it on pointless reactions, you're withdrawing recklessly. But every time you choose silence, you're saving reserving it for what truly matters: health, love, joy. And in the end, it is this savings that makes you truly wealthy. Silence is the key that opens the door to freedom. It teaches us that we don't have to fight every battle. We don't have to prove our worth through reaction. We only need to live, to work, and to love in the right way, and to keep our energy for the journeys that truly matter. 5. Pain turns into strength. Guilt turns into chains. Once you learn to hold silence to protect your inner freedom, you discover a deeper paradox. Your pain, if embraced in the right way, can transform into strength, while the guilt of the wrongdoer becomes a chain that binds them for life. I once spoke with a woman in her 40s, whose marriage had collapsed because of her husband's betrayal. In the early months, she was devastated, as if her whole world had fallen apart. But instead of drowning in hatred, she chose silence. She poured her energy into raising her children, exercising, and learning new skills. 6 months later, she told me, "I realized I am stronger than ever before. I lost someone unworthy, but I found myself again." For her, pain became the raw material for building a new life. Her ex-husband, on the other hand, confessed that he was haunted by guilt. He admitted to friends that the image of his wife walking away in silence without a single reproach stayed with him for years. That was an invisible chain, heavier than any public punishment. Do you see it? Pain has a strange quality. It can be recycled into strength. Like fire, if you let it burn uncontrolled, it will destroy you. But if you learn to use it, that same fire can bring light, warmth, and turn iron into steel. Guilt, however, cannot be recycled. It is a rusted chain, growing heavier with time, imprisoning the one who carries it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." When you turn your pain into strength, you not only heal yourself, but also prove a greater truth: they never truly won. In fact, they are imprisoned in their guilt, while you walk away free. In my therapy work, I've met many middle-aged people who described a life-shaking blow, job loss, a betrayal, a public humiliation that at first crushed them. But from that collapse, they chose to change. Some started exercising, some opened new businesses, some even returned to university after turning 50. They told me, if it weren't for that crisis, I would never have dared to change. That is the power of pain when transformed. And what about guilt? A 55-year-old patient once admitted that years earlier, he had betrayed a close friend's trust to serve his own interest. His friends and family forgave him, but he never forgave himself. I keep hearing the same voice in my head. "You did wrong. You're not worthy anymore." He said no sentence was heavier than the one imposed by his own conscience. He lived like a prisoner, shackled by invisible chains, unable to be free. So I want to ask you, when you suffer from betrayal, do you want that pain to stretch on forever, or do you want it to become the strength that helps you rise again? And if you have ever wronged someone, can you feel the crushing weight of that guilty chain? This is the great divide between two paths. The victim can transform pain into strength, but the wrongdoer rarely escapes their guilt. Silence is the catalyst for this transformation. When you stay silent, you no longer waste your energy demanding immediate justice. You allow time to do its work. You redirect that energy into healing, into personal growth, into turning wounds, into wisdom. Meanwhile, the wrongdoer is trapped. They no longer have an excuse to blame you, no game to continue playing. All that remains is guilt, and guilt grows heavier with every passing day. A psychologist once wrote, "Pain is a guest, it comes and goes. But guilt is a parasite, it clings and drains life away." I find this profoundly true. Pain, if you accept it, will eventually leave, but it leaves behind a lesson. Guilt, however, if it is not released through truth and change, follows the bearer for a lifetime. So the next time you experience pain, ask yourself, what do I want this pain to become? You can let it break you, or you can use it as a stepping stone to rise higher. And when you look at the one who hurt you, remember, you don't need revenge. The chains of guilt have already locked them down. 6. Silence. From personal strength to social message. Once you've learned how to turn pain into strength and realized that guilt itself becomes the chain that imprisons the wrongdoer, you begin to see a greater truth. Silence doesn't stop at the personal level. It sends a powerful message to the society around you. Think about it. In a world that grows louder by the day, where everyone rushes to prove they're right, fighting over every word online, shouting just to be noticed, the one who knows how to be silent shines in a very different way. Silence in today's world is like a lighthouse standing firm in the stormy sea. It doesn't need to scream, yet everyone can see its presence. I once observed a male patient in his 40s, a mid-level manager at a large company. He was often provoked by colleagues during meetings. In the past, he would react sharply, arguing intensely to defend his point. And the result? People remembered the tension, not the substance of what he said. After a few sessions of therapy, he decided to try something new. Silence. When attacked, he didn't rush to respond. He waited, took notes, and then replied only with brief, precise data, and then went quiet again. Over time, the whole team began to notice who was truly calm and who was making noise to hide weakness. He told me, "I never imagined silence would make my colleagues respect me more than all the times I tried to argue my way to victory." That is the social power of silence. It doesn't just help you preserve dignity, it makes others stop and think. When you are silent, people begin to compare. On one side, composure. On the other, noise. And in the long run, society almost always respects composure more. Silence is also a form of soft education. Your children learn from how you react. If you always lose your temper, they will believe anger is the way to solve problems. But if you know when to be silent, when to speak, they will learn that not every voice deserves a response. One of my students once told me, "I'll never forget the image of my father staying silent when insulted. Back then, I thought he was weak, but as I grew older, I realized how strong he truly was." That is the social message silence leaves behind. True strength does not need to be loud. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." When you choose silence, you stop draining your energy trying to prove you're right. You let your actions, your character, and your consistency speak instead. That is a powerful social message. Living rightly matters more than speaking rightly. In one of my lectures, I asked the audience, what image do you want to leave for the world? A person who always has to shout to prove that worth, or someone so calm that without raising their voice, everyone listens. The hall fell into silence. Then a middle-aged woman stood up and said, "I choose silence because I want my children to remember me for my calmness, not my anger." You see, silence does not only preserve peace for the individual. It ripples outward like waves across water. It teaches society lessons about restraint, about the strength of inner discipline. In the age of social media, where every comment can spark a battle, silence is an even more precious social message. It says, I don't need to join every argument. I don't let someone else's anger decide my mood. That is not just self-protection. It is a reminder to all of us. The world needs less noise and more stillness. Silence is also the language of collective wisdom. Look at respected leaders. They never talk too much. They listen more. They choose the right moment to speak. And when they finally do, the whole room falls silent. Why? Because their silence has already given their words. Wait. This is how silence sends a message. A person's value is not measured by the number of words they say, but by the quality of the few words they choose. Think back to your own life. Was there ever a time when you stayed silent, and because of that silence, others changed their view of you? Was there a time when your composure made a whole group see the truth more clearly? Those moments are proof that silence reaches beyond the personal level and becomes a message to the community. When you remain silent, you are teaching society that not every reaction is a solution. Sometimes, it is the pause itself that clears the way for truth to rise. And if enough people live by this principle, it can transform the way our society behaves. Fewer conflicts, more understanding, more dignity. 7. Silence as a legacy. When you understand that silence is not only personal strength, but also a social message, you reach an even deeper layer. Silence becomes a legacy. It imprints itself in the memory of others, shaping your image, leaving behind a value that outlives your individual life. Think of the historical figures we still remember today. Socrates, when facing an unjust trial, did not scream for mercy, nor did he lash out in anger. He remained calm, steady, clear-minded, and let silence speak for him. Thousands of years later, we do not remember the names of his accusers, but we still remember his composure. That is the legacy of silence. Or Marcus Aurelius, the emperor. In the midst of wars and political schemes, Marcus Aurelius did not choose to argue or assign blame. Instead, he chose to write in his journal pages of meditations, silent to the world, written only to remind himself. And yet, that silent writing became a spiritual legacy for millions who came after. He never needed to shout, but his words have echoed louder and farther than any cry ever could. In modern life, we too leave behind a legacy through the way we practice silence. I once had a patient, a father in his 60s. He told me that when he was younger, he was often provoked by others. But instead of arguing, he chose silence. He said, I want my children to remember me for my calmness, not for my anger. Now, in his later years, his children still say, Dad was always the one who knew how to stay silent at the right time. That is the image they carry with them for life, a steadfast, composed father. And that is the legacy he left behind. Have you ever considered that the way you stay silent today might become a memory in someone's heart tomorrow? Your loved ones will remember that you did not shout during tense moments. Your children will remember that you remained calm even when attacked. Your colleagues will remember your composure in difficult meetings. And over time, that image forms an invisible legacy. others come to define you by your silence. Psychology has a concept called the memory halo. Deep, silent moments are etched far more deeply than heated arguments. People may forget the words you spoke, but they will remember the feeling you left behind. And silence, if chosen at the right moment, often leaves a stronger impression than any speech ever could. A woman I know once told me when she faced betrayal, she didn't scream, she didn't argue. She simply walked away in silence. Years later, the one who betrayed her confessed, "What I cannot forget, what still haunts me, is her silence. It was like an indelible mark." You see, that silence became a legacy in someone else's memory, stronger than curses could ever be. Silence is also how you pass on a lesson to the next generation. You don't need long lectures about self-control. Simply by living with timely silence, your children and grandchildren will learn. Real strength is not in shouting, but in preserving peace. And when you are no longer here, that legacy of silence will continue to teach, to inspire. Ask yourself, what do you want others to remember about you when you're gone? Someone who always argued to claim victory, or someone calm, leaving behind a sense of peace and steadiness? Your answer is the kind of legacy you're building each day through how you choose silence. I believe silence is not the absence of a voice. It is an echo that endures. Words may fade within days, but a single moment of well-chosen silence can stay with someone for a lifetime. That is the power of a silent legacy, quiet, yet everlasting. 8. Silence as the highest form of self-mastery. If in the previous idea we saw that silence can become a legacy, mark you leave in the memory of others, then there is a deeper layer. Silence is also the highest form of self-mastery, because when you no longer need to prove anything, that is when you truly master yourself. Have you ever fallen into this situation? Someone slanders you, pushing you into a corner where you feel forced to prove your innocence. You argue, you present evidence, you even beg for understanding. But when the curtain falls, you realize the harder you try to prove yourself, the weaker you appear. Others see only your defensiveness, while the accuser gains more room to twist the story. And yet, silence, though difficult at first, becomes the strongest statement. I don't need to prove myself. The truth is already here, and time will speak for me. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, don't waste your time worrying about what others think. Simply live according to what is right. This is the spirit of true self-mastery. When you are strong enough to remain silent in the face of attack, you are showing that your life is not controlled by outside noise, but guided by inner values. I recall a patient in his 50s who was often belittled and gossiped about by colleagues. He told me, I used to always explain myself. I was afraid of being misunderstood. But the more I explained, the more exhausted I became. One day, I asked myself, who am I proving this to? 2 people who don't trust me more to myself. And I decided to stay silent. At first, silence felt like failure. But a year later, as the truth became clear, as colleagues saw his consistent hard work, the rumors vanished on their own. He said, I didn't need to open my mouth, and yet, in the end, people trusted me more. That is the power of self-mastery. Silence in moments of provocation is one of the hardest human tests. The ego in us always wants to respond, to have the last word. But each time you hold back, you're training an invisible muscle, the muscle of self-control. And over time, that muscle makes you steadier than any argument ever could. Think back to the last time you reached that point where you no longer needed to prove anything. How did it feel? Like laying down a heavy burden. You no longer cared what others thought. You no longer chased recognition. You simply lived rightly, acted rightly, and left the rest to time. That is true freedom. Modern psychology calls this state inner locus of control. Those who achieve it are shown to have higher happiness, less stress, and even longer lifespans. Why? Because they no longer let meaningless arguments drain their energy. They know what matters to them, and they save their energy for those things. Silence, as the pinnacle of self-mastery, also has a powerful social effect. When you don't need to prove anything, you force others to reflect. They begin to wonder, why isn't he reacting? Is it because he's certain of himself? Is it because the truth is already on his side? And suddenly, your silence becomes a louder answer than any defense ever could. A friend of mine, once a lawyer, told me, in court, sometimes you win, not with endless arguments, but with silence at the right moment. When the opponent talks too much, you simply stay quiet and let the entire room feel the imbalance. He laughed and added, silence, sometimes, is the final punch. You see, when you reach the point where you no longer need to prove yourself, you have stepped out of the game others are trying to drag you into. You're no longer pulled into the mud of endless arguments. You save your energy for your own path, and that is what makes you untouchable. Ask yourself, are you spending too much time trying to prove yourself? To colleagues, to family, or even to strangers on the internet? If so, try choosing silence just once. At first, it may feel like weakness, but over time, you will realize it is the strength of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Silence, at its highest level, is no longer defense. It is declaration. I know who I am, and I do not need you to confirm it. That is the summit of self-mastery, and it is also the path toward lasting peace. 9. Silence as a medicine for healing. After you've climbed to the peak of self-mastery, you no longer need to prove anything. You will discover another profound truth. Silence is medicine for the soul. It not only shields you from external storms, but it also helps you recover from wounds within. Have you ever felt deeply hurt? Perhaps by harsh words from a loved one, a betrayal from a friend, or a painful failure at work. In such moments, we often feel the urge to release the pain, to tell someone, to argue for justice, or to shout just to relieve the pressure. But have you noticed? The more we talk, the more we relive the wound, the deeper we stir it. Silence, in those moments, is the gentle medicine. It gives the mind a pause. Just as when you injure your hand, you must leave the wound untouched so it can begin to heal. The soul requires the same. Silence is the invisible bandage, wrapping around the hurt and giving it the time it needs to close. I once had a female patient in her 50s who had just lost her husband. She told me every day, my friends urged me to talk it out, to share, to lighten my heart, but I didn't want to. I just needed to sit quietly, look out the window, and listen to the wind. Many worried she was falling into depression. But after a few months, she found balance again. She said, silence healed me. It gave me the space to speak with myself, to cry, and then to stop crying. You see, not every word is medicine. Sometimes silence is the purest cure in Stoic philosophy. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." I believe silence is not only for listening to others, it's also for listening to ourselves. When you are silent, you can finally hear your own soul. You can hear the fragments of emotions that have not yet been processed. And it is that listening that allows true healing to begin. Modern psychology agrees. Research on mindfulness shows that even just a few minutes of silence each day can reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and help the brain recover from emotional strain. Biologically, silence is the brain's time to clean up, to reorganize memories and emotions. It is science confirming what the Stoics already knew thousands of years ago. You can try this. Instead of reacting immediately when you were hurt, sit down, breathe deeply, and be silent. Don't rush to find an answer. Don't try to explain. Simply allow yourself a few hours, a few days of quiet. You will notice that the pain is no longer as sharp as it first was. It softens, becomes gentler to touch, and one day it turns into a memory instead of a wound. Silence is also a way to regain balance after a shock. I remember a man who lost his job after 20 years of service. He told me that during the first week, he didn't talk to anyone. He just went to the park, walked, read, and stayed silent. Friends criticized him for not sharing, but he said, "I needed silence to rearrange myself inside. If I spoke too soon, I would speak with bitterness. I wanted to speak when I felt more at peace." A few months later, he began a new job with a lighter spirit. He said, "Silence saved me from bitterness." You see, silence is not denial of pain, it is a gentle embrace of it. Like a mother holding her crying child, no words are needed, just the embrace. Our soul is the same. Sometimes it only needs silence to hold itself, and once you have healed, your silence becomes a source of comfort for others. You don't need lofty advice. Simply sitting beside someone in silence can make them feel supported, because silence, when it comes from a peaceful soul, radiates the most powerful healing energy. So the next time you feel emotionally wounded, remember, you don't need to scream for comfort. Just sit down and let silence wrap around you like a warm blanket. For silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of healing. And as you can see, silence has never been mere emptiness. It is inner discipline. It is the invisible verdict for the wrongdoer. It is the mirror that reflects truth. It is the shield that protects freedom. It is the material that turns pain into strength. It is a social message. It is a legacy. And it is the medicine that heals your own soul. In a world that grows noisier every day, silence is the loudest voice. It says, "I am in control. I do not need to prove myself. I choose peace as my companion." I believe each of us, especially those of us who have lived more than half our lives, have experienced this power of silence in our own way. And what about you? Have you ever chosen silence over argument? And how did that silence change you? Share your story or your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your experience. And if this message resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, so we can continue this journey together, seeking the strength of peace through Stoic philosophy and through everyday life. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. I look forward to seeing you again in the next one.